This is Apropos. Germany's far-right AfD party looks poised to capture a historic 1 in 5 ballots as voters in Germany prepare to head to the polls this Sunday. The election is expected to deliver victory for the Conservative bloc and a strong second-place showing for the Alternative for Germany, with a series of violent attacks linked to foreign-born suspects compounding public concern over security. Immigration has been a central issue during the campaign. As Antonia Kerrigan reports, healthcare staff are increasingly worried that the debate will make it harder to recruit skilled workers from abroad to fill a growing labour shortage.
Dr. Mario de la Piedra Walter, a neurologist from Mexico, enjoys talking to his patients at this Berlin hospital, but he's been here a few years now, and he feels the contrast between his and the German culture adds a warmth to their interactions.
It took about 2 years to get my qualifications recognized here. In the end, I think it's important to be able to speak the German language, and as for medicine, it doesn't change that much from one country to another. So that change was a bit easier.
Nurse Santiago Lorenzo is new to the ward, but described receiving a positive multicultural welcome on his arrival, with colleagues from a range of countries helping him with his German. 18% of the German population are immigrants, and their hospitals are a microcosm. 15% of the country's healthcare workers holding foreign passports, including 5,000 Syrian doctors. The Berlin hospital's care director explains that Germany's ageing population makes immigration not an indulgence, but a necessity.
More people in an ageing society are in need of care, and fewer young people are coming along. And so one of our key priorities is recruiting skilled labour from abroad.
She fears the current political rhetoric will deter talented foreign workers from choosing Germany. The head of the German Hospitals Association said that some 40,000 skilled workers would be needed every year to plug the demographic deficit. And it's not just healthcare. Logistics and construction too struggle to recruit and depend heavily on foreign workers.
Well, for more on what's at stake in Sunday's vote, let's bring in Ed Turner, Chair of the International Association for the Study of German Politics and Co-Director of the Aston Centre for Europe. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme this evening, Ed. So, as we've been saying, a series of attacks has put really security and migration front and centre during this election campaign. Has it been the priority for voters? How exactly has it played out?
Well, what you say is absolutely right, that there are two key issues in the campaign. One is the rather sluggish state of Germany's economy, and the second are issues around migration and security. And certainly, it was interesting, for example, in one of the TV debates between Olaf Scholz and Friedrich Merz, the CDU-CSU's candidate, the centre-right candidate, about half the airtime was taken up talking about migration and security issues.
And the frontrunner, you mentioned him there, Friedrich Merz, he actually sponsored a draft bill with the AfD, with support from that party. Will that have helped or hindered his campaign?
Well, that's right. He put it forward, and contrary to what he'd said previously, he was willing to accept that it might only pass with AfD votes. It wouldn't be fair to say the AfD sponsored it in any way. But I think at the time that felt like a really big thing. It was to say it went against what Merz had said previously. It allowed the AfD to be seen to be having a more visible impact on German politics than had been the case hitherto. The polls really haven't shifted on this. The one change that we've seen, interestingly, in recent days is that the far left party has been doing a bit better, perhaps as voters are more polarised in their responses to this.
And Ed, the AfD, it wants to close German borders, leave the common European asylum policy. What are the other main parties' policies when it comes to immigration?
Well, amongst the mainstream parties, they're all talking about reducing irregular migration. Actually, the clip earlier that you showed about labour migration was interesting, and I think there's an acceptance that the migration of skilled workers to Germany is necessary. But they're talking about clamping down on irregular migration. They're all talking about increasing level of deportations. Merz wants to go further. He wants to see people turned back at the German border. He wants to see more internment of people with no right to be in Germany. And that brings with it a host of questions about the legality of that under European law. He does also talk about maybe rewriting some of the European rules on this as well.
And the rise that we're seeing in support for the far right, is that due to the issue of immigration, of security, the policies that the party itself has, or is it more to do with, a general disillusionment with the traditional parties in Germany? What's behind it?
Well, of course, these things play into each other. You've got a situation where all of the leading candidates in the election are relatively unpopular. You've got a situation where the economy has really been struggling. You've got a situation where the three-party coalition that until November governed Germany has visibly been at odds within itself, lots of public arguments. So all of those have fueled the unpopularity of the mainstream. But then on top of it, there is concern about migration, and as well as a pretty bleak economic backdrop. And so, put all of those things together. These are quite propitious circumstances for the far right to cast its appeal.
And in terms of European policy, how much is at stake with these elections? A strong government in Germany, it is needed, particularly when Europe is dealing with the various threats posed by Donald Trump, also when it comes to finding a peace deal for Ukraine.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And let me flip it around. Imagine if you have a situation in Germany where no government is formed for months on end, where there's a series of bickering, where, heaven forbid, there's talk about new elections. Those things, with a void at the heart of Europe, would be extremely damaging at a moment when it's very obvious that Europe needs to pull together. Equally, amongst the mainstream parties on European questions, there's a relatively strong consensus. I think there's also a feeling that Germany has not been punching at its weight over the course of the last parliament, and that there is an opportunity to reset some important relationships and start afresh.
And those mainstream parties, you mentioned them there, you've kind of suggested perhaps coalition talks could be on the line a little further down. All the parties, mainstream ones, saying that they won't work with the AfD. Is that something that's likely to change depending on how the cards fall following this election?
I think there's absolutely no prospect of mainstream parties looking to bring the AfD into government. This is a party which is really extreme, puts the word remigration in its manifesto, talks about Germany leaving the European Union, where one of its regional leaders has twice been prosecuted for using banned Nazi symbols. They're not to be compared with the parties of Giorgia Meloni or Marine Le Pen. However, that doesn't change the fact it'll be difficult to form a coalition. I think people worry about what would happen if coalition talks between mainstream parties broke down.
And you mentioned kind of rhetoric there, propaganda perhaps. How has language itself been used in this debate? The far right talk a lot about remigration, which actually seems to mean mass deportation, but they're not exactly calling it that, are they? So how is language playing into perhaps moving this party more towards the mainstream, or is it?
Well, I think what the language shows, and it's important not just to focus on the language of the far right, but of the mainstream, is that German politics, mainstream politics, has shifted on these issues, and in a way which certainly takes a harsher tone on migration more generally. And indeed, sometimes if you look at the way that Friedrich Merz cast his appeal to federal parliament in the debate that you mentioned, when in the end his parliamentarians voted with the AfD, it's really quite robust, really quite strong. Language which we wouldn't have expected to hear from mainstream German politicians in recent years.
And the candidates in the running for Chancellor, they're currently, of course, taking part in the final TV debate ahead of the vote on Sunday. Will that make any difference to how voters decide to cast their ballots on the day? What kind of an impact are these debates having on the campaign?
The TV debates are having a minimal impact. Voters often just look at them and feel themselves confirmed in their views. Maybe Olaf Scholz in the first one, which I think was the most widely watched, had a slightly better night than some expected, got slightly better ratings, but the polls didn't really shift at all. And one of the remarkable things about this campaign is that the polls have been quite stable. And of course, in any case, many Germans have already cast their votes by post. So, it certainly looks nailed on that the Christian Democrats will come out on top in the election. It looks almost certain that the AfD will come second. The uncertainty that exists is around which of the smaller parties will achieve the 5% which is necessary to gain seats, and that in turn will play into coalition arithmetic. So it's still going to be an interesting night on Sunday, but it's very clear that the CDU-CSU will come out on top.
And just finally, Friedrich Merz, he is a clear backer of Ukraine. He's been targeted by pro-Russian disinformation during this campaign. What kind of an impact is that going to have on voters? And what does that really say about how important this election is really to the rest of Europe?
Well, disinformation, indeed Russian disinformation is something, a feature of election campaigns, not just in Germany. Clearly it's been one of a number of factors boosting AfD support, but I think not the main one, to be honest. I think we've covered the reasons why the AfD has been gaining ground. Friedrich Merz will continue to try and keep his nerve, try and continue to lead his party's campaign to a successful conclusion. They won't get a fantastic result by historical standards, but they're very likely to lead the next government.
Ed, we'll have to leave it there for now. We'll see how it all plays out on Sunday. Thanks so much for joining us. That's Ed Turner, Chair of the International Association for the Study of German Politics. He's also co-director of the Aston Centre for Europe. Well, that's it from us for now.